Hello again and welcome to the Chapter 2 module. Chapter 2 focuses on professional responsibilities of teachers of young adolescents, middle school level students. Again, a reminder that you should be completing the blog posting, the open book quiz, and the assignment for each of the respective chapters as you finish those up. So if you just finished up Chapter 1, then your blog post should be done. You should have submitted your open book quiz in the Dropbox in Sakai and have completed your assignment from Chapter 1 and put that in the Dropbox as well. And when you put those in the Dropbox, just generate an email to me so that I'm aware that they're available to be graded. So with that, let's go on to Chapter 2 here. Again, Chapter 2 is looking at the role of the teacher. In Chapter 1, we looked a little bit at students, young adolescents, and some of the characteristics there. Chapter 2 is really focusing on middle school educators, middle school teachers. And again, we go back to the National Middle School Association and the characteristics that they prescribe for middle school education. And you see one of the key characteristics is leadership and organization. Not only are teachers the curriculum leaders and instructional leaders in their classrooms, but they're also leaders in the school. And they provide the organization and the structure for students. So it's critical that educators that enter into the middle school are equipped with the requisite knowledge, skills, and disposition to teach students at that critical age. Again, if you take a look at the heuristic provided by the National Middle School Association, you'll see here some of these elements here are directly related to how well equipped a teacher is to go in and create a nurturing and facilitating teaching and learning environment. So again, a lot of things there: multiple learning and teaching approaches, high expectations, collaborative leadership, active learning, shared vision. All of these are critical factors here. And I'm reminded in reading Kellogg's chapter here of the learning pyramid here in terms of how we structure the learning process and working our way from sort of the more traditional lecture reading oriented classes and lesson plans to ones that really have students roll their sleeves up and do hands-on and engage in fruitful discussion and are rich with audiovisual visuals and photographs and other types of things, and really emphasize authentic types of learning. And that's what the pyramid there represents as well. In terms of the pedagogy, Kellogg in the text talks about traditional pedagogy, where the curriculum is presented as part of a whole, where there's strict adherence to the curriculum. The teacher is seeking the correct answers in the students, and assessment is separate from the teaching, to a more constructivist approach, which is emphasized by a lot of middle school educators and researchers, where the curriculum is presented whole to part with emphasis on the big concepts, the big questions, the thematic approach that you find in a lot of middle schools, where assessment is interwoven throughout. And we'll talk later in Chapter 7 about assessment in depth, and it really needs to be seamlessly interwoven into the teaching and learning process here. Again, if there's a comparison with traditional versus more constructivist approaches, you see that, and again, this is what Kellogg in the text talks about, is that you find a leadership approach at the middle school level that's more efficacious, is one that emphasizes supporting or coaching students, helping to facilitate the learning, as opposed to sort of a directing, kind of mandating, almost draconian approach, very teacher-centered approach. There's a happy medium in there somewhere, and that's really what we're striving for at the middle school level. Again, it's all part of the middle school philosophy, or the middle school concept, if you will, that we've talked a lot about. And again, go back to the NMSA diagram that they provide us. It's a real good heuristic. It really is a learning tool that helps us to understand how we can create a successful school, classroom, classroom environment for middle school students, and it really is bringing everything together and making sure that that the scaffolding is there, the teaching and learning, the curriculum, instructional assessment scaffolding there to help students to be successful. With respect to your philosophy of teaching at the middle school level, I want you to reflect on that in this chapter and in your blog posting. How do you see it? Again, there are all sorts of different approaches. We've talked about a constructivist approach. Kellogg talks about a reconstructionist, a behaviorist approach. There are other camps that aren't represented by this graphic here, such as a social reconstructionist approach. But really, what is it that that you would say is the best? I don't know necessarily a moniker, but just what best describes your approach to education, and how is that aligned with the National Middle School Association's basic canons of or tenets of middle school education in the 21st century? There really is, again, Kellogg talks about this and provides three basic theoretical pillars here of behaviorism, romanticism, and a cognitive experimentalist approach. So look through the chapter and read those three and see which of those is most closely aligned with how you define education. Whether you're coming from an elementary background, early childhood, or a secondary background, how do you see middle school education? How does that compare with these three approaches here? We'll do a little bit more with these approaches later in one of the activities. With respect to teaching style and the importance of teaching style, I think what you're going to find is it really is sort of a taxonomic or a hierarchical kind of a thing that we saw back there with the pyramid. Also with respect to teaching styles, it's sort of laid out there on a spectrum here, from the more hands-on kind of left brain approach, logical, mathematical, organized, structured, to the more creative, the right brain, the more constructivist types of environments that you can create in the middle school. And don't be pigeonholed into just one. It really can vary. It can vary with the subject you're teaching, with the middle school grade level. There's a big difference between how you approach teaching 6th grade versus 8th grade, how you approach teaching math versus science or social studies. Even within certain subject areas like social studies, how you teach about Native Americans might differ from how you approach the teaching of the Civil War, for example. But it gets back a lot of times to your teaching style here. I give you a few graphics. What I want you to do is just kind of look through these. I'm not going to talk to each one, but kind of go through and see through the prism of your own philosophy of education and your own approach to education. How do you compare? If you look at this one, for example, that Ned Herman has proposed on different thinking styles, are you a more what he might call a more blue teacher, rational self? Are you more experimental, more feeling, affective, or a more conservative, gatekeeping type of green quadrant teacher? And then just ask yourself how you feel comfortable, whether you feel comfortable with that or not. Other educators like Felder Silverman provides a continuum here, and how you interact with others. Are you very extroverted or introverted? How you see the processing of information. Is it based on the senses, or is it more intuitive? Is it emphasizing thinking versus feeling, judgment versus perception? So again, subject your own approach to teaching to this kind of examination that Felder Silverman proposed for us here. Again, visual versus verbal, sensing versus initiative, sequential versus global. There are a couple of other, this is one that's the R2-D2 approach. A couple of other approaches that I think you'll find interesting here. So look through those and combine what you take from the reading from Kellogg with what you see here. Another lesson plan approach is the left brain, right brain format approach that is proposed by McCarthy. And this one, basically, it provides us with a teaching and learning sequencing, but it also helps us to understand better ourselves as teachers as well as our students as learners. How are they approaching things? And it asks what I love are those big questions: the why, the what, the how, and the if. And that's really how you sequence. You go from level 1 through level 4. McCarthy's format is a lot of times used as a framework, a syntax for designing or developing lesson plans. So you start with that first activity that has students. I'll go to the next graphic to show you a little bit better. The first one that has students engage hands-on, roll their sleeves up, and get involved with whatever sort of manipulatives or primary documents that you've got for them, or if you've laid things out in a science lab or whatever it is that you've got for them. Then you introduce the conceptualizing. You introduce the foundation there, the key concepts, the key skills, the bits of knowledge. Once they've got that, the first one, again, the first step has piqued their interest. The second step has given them the foundation. Notice you didn't start with that kind of foundation. You wanted to pique their interest first. Then you have them apply what they've learned in the third stage of the format learning cycle. And then finally, after you've done that through some sort of real-world kind of a scenario or vignette or authentic kind of performance activity, then you give them an opportunity to demonstrate their creativity and give them, could be a hypothetical kind of a situation, it could be something you give them in terms of homework or a research project, but somehow you are demanding of them that they engage in some sort of a creative activity. So it brings it all together, and it really does take advantage of both the left brain and the right brain along the way, and that's what the little R and the L stand for, is allowing students to do something that's more left brain, logical, mathematical, and so on, something more right brain, creative, spatial, visual. So again, different approaches to teaching, using a discussion method, using a teacher-centered information method, using a coaching, hands-on, guided practice kind of approach, using Hunter's terminology there, and then that self-discovery kind of thing. And you can see, and this is what I like about format, you can see how you're going from the concrete to the abstract, how you're going from the reflective to the active, the doing. It's a great model for developing lessons at the middle school level. The next graphic, take a look at it. It's a learning activities repository, and it basically tries to provide you with a heuristic for understanding all the sorts of different types of teaching and learning activities you can involve your students in, particularly at the middle school level, but it has application across the board, P through 12. Likewise here, the next graphic is a wheel of instructional choices, and it really is, as the title here says, teaching and learning. It really is a praxis where everything comes together, and you orchestrate it, you choreograph it as the middle school teacher. That's your responsibility here, and that's what Kellogg tries to emphasize in Chapter 2 here. There's a great work entitled The Skillful Teacher by John Safire that I just want to point out to you. Kellogg doesn't mention it, but a lot of what Kellogg is talking about in this chapter kind of goes back to Safire's piece on The Skillful Teacher. And again, what you find is one of the keys to effective middle school teaching is to have that kind of momentum to keep things going. And Safire, and you can go back and take a look at these slides here. Again, the PDF of the PowerPoint is in the resources folder. Take a look at it and see, though. But you can see here that in middle school, just as important in all the grade levels, though, you have to keep that momentum. You have to provide. You have to have everything ready to go. You have to have the fillers there. If something runs short on time, you have to be flexible enough to allow for a real fruitful discussion and not just be on the watch, so to speak. So again, that's up to the teacher, is to continue to do that. Safire also talks about the principles of learning, making it active, having having to set the tone, keep the goals in sight. So again, go back and take a look at what Safire has to offer here, and ask yourself how well you believe you would be at some of these activities, or not only that, but just how much experience or knowledge you have of these, and then look a little bit further, because they all play a key role in learning at the middle school level. The other thing that is touched on in Chapter 2 is the role of technology, and I call it the digital teacher. I think that even makes it even more powerful, allows you to have even greater opportunities to bring in the outside world, to break down the barriers of the classroom in your middle school teaching, by taking advantage of the resources there. Here are two clips here. I've got the links to Did You Know, and pay attention if you haven't seen these before. Take a few minutes. They're only about 3 or 4 minutes in length, and just review them and see, just as a reminder, the ubiquitous nature of technology and how effective it's been in helping to define society, and how it's just really in an embryonic stage in terms of its integration into the schools, particularly at the middle school level. It seems like education has lagged behind society and the corporate world in terms of the integration of technology, and likewise it seems that middle school has lagged behind, particularly elementary school, in terms of utilization of technology. So take a look at these two, because we really have seen a shift from a me generation to an us generation here. The timeline here just sort of shows our evolution here up to a wired network era that we find ourselves in. And again, in a network era, it's much more complex. It's not about learning to do, but learning to be. It's about the connections. It's about the context. What I like too is this last one here, that we're in a state of perpetual beta, where we're constantly trying things out. And your middle school students are going to be that way too, in terms of the technology they use. When they go out and buy a cell phone, they're not buying it for the rest of their lives. They're buying it for the next year or two, and they're trying to get a plan that allows them to trade it off, in a year or so, because they know it's a state of beta. A year from now, there's going to be something that is much more efficient at what they need, whether it's browsing the web or texting or whatever the case might be. And that's really how we should approach teaching, particularly at the middle school level. It's a perpetual state of beta. You're trying something out. You're doing that kind of reflection at the end of a lesson, and then making the revisions the next time you teach it. So again, with respect to the classroom we live in, it's not the same classroom it was just a few short years ago. I give you some statistics here from the Pew Internet and American Life Project. The Pew Research did, and they found again the students that are out there now, the online teens. You can see here in terms of their proficiency in the use of technology, how often they go online and so on. You can click on the links and you can go to the full reports here. But again, it's all about the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants. A lot of you sort of cross over both, bridging 2 centuries of your lives. But middle school level, basically, just like the PBS link that I've got here coming up, and again, there's some more data here from the Pew Research folks here. Growing up online, middle school students on down through elementary, they've grown up online. They've grown up with a game controller in one hand and a mouse in the other, and that's the only world they've known. And so there's a lot that goes into teaching middle school that involves the digital information age that we find ourselves in. So again, you can click here and you can go to the PBS site and play a couple of the videos there on the revolution that's going on in the classrooms based on the use of technology. Likewise, here is another link that goes to PBS documentary on Digital Nation. Again, with a focus on how it's technology, not only the ubiquitous nature of technology, but also just how it's changing how we learn. And it's, as you can see there from the title of that one, it's rewiring young minds here. The next few slides compare and contrast sort of the old world, Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, and now, of course, we're in the cloud computing Web 3.0. And you take a look at this compare and contrast, and ask yourself, how much has changed just in your life alone. And I think you'll find it is pretty consistent in terms of the fact that the only thing that remains the same is change. That's the only consistency here in terms of the digital age that we find ourselves. Let's go ahead and go on here to the end. Again, another compare and contrast here. But basically, it gets back to the fact that that we live in a digital age, and it really has come to not only define society, but it's also served to change how we define teaching and learning. And we really have gone from a learning 1.0 to a learning 2.0 and even a 3.0 environment, where learning was just at one time it was just the teacher, the instructor, and now it really is a collaborative environment that we find ourselves in. That concludes our discussion of Chapter 2.